freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours, welcome to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we explore the defining issue of our time, at least I think so, the character crisis that is plaguing much of the free world, and the importance of character to freedom and to our country's greatness, because when we are people of good character, when we're true to our values, when we uphold the values and traditions that made us great, then we are a great society. And when we don't, when we succumb to all the temptations of our current culture of entitlement and relativism, then we descend that slippery slope, and unfortunately this invites government to try and restore order by legislating more and more restrictive laws that impinge upon all of our freedoms. And this is not a solution that works. It never has worked. It stifles innovation. It puts folks who are already doing their best to pay their dues and to make their contributions. It puts them at a great disadvantage by overburdening them. They already have enough to carry on their shoulders, and they don't really need more oppressive rules and regulations, burdening them even further. And besides which, those folks among us who are of markedly deficient character, they don't pay attention to these rules anyway. So this is the wrong way to go. The right way to go is to make character count again, and that's been the main purpose and thrust of my work for the last 20-some years. As a psychologist in practice for many years, I came to realize early on the importance of character, because these days most folks in the mental health professions, in the helping professions, most of the time they are dealing with problems that are related very closely to someone's character. There are very few problems these days that are strictly the result of someone's biochemistry or simply the result of some horrible circumstance from which they haven't recovered. That is really the very small part of the picture. And there are very few folks these days who are suffering from debilitating fears and anxieties. Anxieties so great that they are literally making themselves so sick. Sick with worry and sick with fret. These kinds of conditions used to be rampant. They're not anymore. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time these days, when folks are, especially when they're kind of coerced into treatment programs or into some kind of therapy, most of the time, what's really at stake is a character issue that has exasperated responsible folks who have to live with or work with the person of impaired character and whose life has become a living nightmare as a result. So that's what I talk about. That's what I write about in my 3 books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the go-to book for understanding the covertly aggressive, manipulative character type, and my second book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age. Character Disturbance looks at all of the various disturbances of character that you're likely to encounter, what really makes these folks function the way they do, how they end up getting the better of you, how they end up making your life miserable, and most especially, the 2 things that no other books offer. One is a really prescriptive guide to dealing more effectively with such folks, and 2, knowing what to do when you're trying to get help, either for yourself or for these folks, because traditional ways of helping don't work, and so this book is meant for you as a handbook, as a guidebook to dealing with the character impaired in your lives. And then my 3rd book, tailored toward the Christian audience, The Judas Syndrome, also a bestseller, and all these books available from Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, any of the online sellers, as well as your neighborhood bookstore. And if they don't carry it on the shelves, you can always order it. In Sheep's Clothing has been out for so many years, many stores don't stock it on the shelves anymore, but you can always get it. And of course, you can have it delivered almost instantly online, and you can download it on iBooks. You can download it on Amazon Kindle, any of the download sources. So avail yourself of them. Avail yourself of the material on my blogs at www.manipulative-people.com. That's manipulative-people.com. And also counselingresource.com. That's www.counseling with 2 L's resource.com for my weekly blog articles. And you'll find a great series just beginning this week on the manipulative-peopleblog.com site. You'll find a series beginning on the most misunderstood concepts and terms in mental health and psychology these days, the most misused, misunderstood, and confusing terms and principles and concepts. I'm going to have a whole series. It's going to be a fairly lengthy series that will examine these things. And it's really an important series for a lot of reasons, but mainly because when folks fail to understand correctly the nature of a problem, it puts them at such a disadvantage for making things better. And this is true not of the average person who's seeking help and trying to understand a problem that they have, either with a family member, their husband or wife, or a child, or a coworker, or a boss. It's not just that it puts that person at a disadvantage when they don't understand what's really going on, but a person can also be disadvantaged when the mental health professional or the helping professional perceives the problem incorrectly as well, or uses terms inappropriately. And I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about an example that I posted on my Friday post on manipulative-people.com, and I'll talk about that, and I'll give some other examples. But I also want you to join the conversation. If you have any questions at all about any of the principles that I outline in my books, about any psychological term or principle or concept, anything that you have been told either by a therapist or have heard in common parlance and you don't quite understand, or have maybe had a bone to pick with because you haven't felt like somebody has nailed the problem quite right. Maybe you even sought help and didn't get help because nobody seemed to really nail the problem on the head. I'd like to hear from you at 718-717-8296. Give me a call. It's going to be kind of an open mic night. I'd be glad to take your call on any question that you might have, anything you want to share. That's 718-717-8296. So give us a call. Love to take your call. Love to talk with you. You'll find on the blog Manipulative People this week the first in a series of articles on misused terms and misunderstood concepts in the psychological area. And you'll find this a very helpful series in many ways, not just to clear up some misconceptions and some erroneous notions about various terms that you've probably heard. These days, there's a lot of psychobabble out there, and there's also an awful lot of individuals who have heard terms used often enough that you hear them in common parlance all the time. You know, there was a time not too long ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where a term came back into vogue for some reason. I was hearing it on just about every single TV show and every single movie that I went to see. There was a reference to folks being quote unquote anal. And by this, meaning someone who is being fairly obsessive compulsive or meticulous. This term dates back to a Freudian notion that folks who had obsessive compulsive personality traits, folks who tended to be who tended to be a bit tedious and meticulous, and who tended to be kind of nitpicky about things, and particular, that these folks who were perhaps a bit overly conscientious got this way because they somehow either derived too much pleasure from or had too much trauma experienced when they were potty trained, especially when they were trained with respect to controlling their sphincter. And this was a notion that folks really believed in for a while, and that mental health professionals were even trained in this kind of theory. And so this kind of got out there in the public discourse, and it came into vogue once again for some reason several years ago. And I still occasionally will hear people use the term in a somewhat joking way, but nonetheless serious way to describe someone who is being somewhat excessively meticulous or obsessive compulsive. And, you know, frankly, there's never been any validity to this notion that folks who tend to be this way were in any way traumatized when learning to control their bowels when they were pre-toddlers or toddlers. And there's never been any validity to the notion that any of these folks got to be that way because they got too much delight out of either retaining their excrement when learning to train. These notions really, it's kind of almost laugh out loud funny to think now that we ever used to think these things, but these things were not only thought fairly widely, they were taught. And there's never really been any validity to them, never been any validity demonstrated to these notions. And the same is true with a lot of psychological terms and principles that I hear bandied about in a confused and misunderstood way. Some of the confusion has to do with the fact that terms have entered into common parlance. Some folks refer to these terms as psychobabble, and they've kind of gotten corrupted over time. But the other thing is that many times helping professionals actually misuse these terms. And in my post on Friday on the manipulative-people.com blog, I give an example of that. And I'm going to go into that example in just a bit. But as I mentioned before, I want to extend the invitation again. If you have any questions at all or comments about any terms or concepts that you don't understand, maybe you even have a bone to pick with, maybe you received a diagnosis and question it, maybe you have heard some terms and are not quite sure what they mean, maybe someone you know has been given a label and you don't agree with it necessarily, or you have some questions about it, feel free to give me a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Happy to take your call. Well, let's get to this example that I posted on the blog on Friday. I was just introducing this series that's going to be going for several weeks, and I mentioned that when I was doing case study research for my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, most of my research came from actual case studies that either I was directly familiar with firsthand, or that I had experience on as a consultant, or experience on as a supervisee, or experience on as an observer. But I gathered all this clinical data. And in my early work, I saw primarily two groups of folks. One were victims of manipulators and other kinds of disturbed characters. These were folks who were kind of at their wits' end because somebody in their lives was making them feel crazy. They knew that there was something wrong with them, but somehow this other person made them think they were the crazy ones. And this made them feel anxious and a bit depressed and very confused. And so I was dealing with this group of folks. I was also dealing with folks who were, in fact, character impaired in some way and were driving people in their lives pretty bats. Folks who were driving their spouses or their parents or their coworkers to the brink with their shenanigans and their unruly and irresponsible behaviors. So I saw both of these groups of folks, and I collected a lot of case data, a lot of clinical information. And on one occasion, I met a couple who, of course, shall remain nameless. And of course, as always, I always alter some circumstances just a little bit to ensure complete anonymity. You'll never hear me mention anything on this program that would reveal a confidence of any type. There'll be no confidential information revealed on the program. But I was dealing with a couple, and the husband in this relationship had been labeled, had been given a diagnosis by a prior therapist. The folks had been to see a therapist. I won't mention the professional type credentials of the therapist. These days, there are so many kinds of therapists out there, from marriage and family therapists to social workers to professional counselors to life coaches to psychologists, psychiatrists. There are many different kinds, even nurse practitioners and licensed psychiatric nurse practitioners. There are so many folks who can basically hang out a shingle and perform therapy of one type or another. But these folks had been to see a therapist, and the man had been diagnosed as having a commitment phobia, a fear of commitment. Now, let me distinguish, first of all, between a phobia and anxiety. An anxious response, our anxiety response, is very analogous to our fear response. It feels the same as fear does. Except when we're anxious, we usually can't put our finger on what specifically is giving rise to the sensation of fear. We have all the fear reactions. We get tense. Our periphery, our blood vessels in the periphery constrict. Maybe our heart rate goes up a bit. We get adrenaline flowing. We feel kind of like we want to flee or else prepare to fight. It's part of a primitive reflex. That's what anxiety is all about. And if we can identify specifically why that's happening, and we can point to a specific thing that is making us fearful, then we call that a phobia. So technically speaking, a commitment phobia would be a person who literally fears entering into a committed relationship. There's something about the idea of commitment that scares the heck out of them and causes them symptoms and causes them to either want to flee or to prepare their systems for a battle that they think that's going to be waged against them, where they're going to be hurt in some way. So that would be a true commitment phobe. A commitment phobic person would be a person who is literally scared to death, scared sick of making a commitment, of being in a committed relationship. And that's how this person was diagnosed. And the therapist conjectured that this man must have gotten to be that way because from things that he had said about his rearing in his home, the therapist gleaned that this person's mother was perhaps too overbearing. And because the mother was overbearing, the man lost his sense of individual identity, felt like he was going to be overly oppressed, felt like he was going to be smothered, felt like he was going to be basically stripped of all individual identity and worth, and therefore he began to mistrust and fear closeness with his mother and generalized that to all women. As he came to see it, the therapist assumed women were basically out to dominate and control you, and therefore you had to keep your distance. And so he avoided true intimacy out of fear and preserved a sense of personal power, but yet satisfying his need for relationships with women by having affair after affair after casual affair. So this was this therapist's assessment of this predicament. And here is what this kind of assessment set up. And this is why I say it's so important that the framework that is set in a therapy, it's so important that that framework is correct, because it sets up a dynamic for both parties in a relationship. And this woman in this relationship, believing that her husband's behavior stemmed from his deep fear and mistrust, believed, of course, that therefore, logically, that the only remedy to this was to prove that she was not like all the women that he expected her to be like. That she was steadfast, that she was loyal, that she was trustworthy, that she would not be overbearing. In fact, she rarely confronted him. And even when she did, she felt guilty because she felt like perhaps he would view this like he viewed his supposedly overbearing mother. So, acting on the framework that the therapist set up for this whole scenario, she was the suffering party in this relationship, the enduring party, for several years. But after several years of being betrayed and abused herself, she thought it was time for a change, and that's how I came to see them. And of course, it is remotely possible. It is possible that someone could be commitment phobic. That is a possibility. And of course, it is possible that phobia could arise out of some fear of being dominated by another person in the relationship. Of course, that's all possible. This is the heart of neurosis. This is part and parcel of neurosis. But living as we do in an age where character disturbance is much more common than neurosis, this is not something that I readily assume. So when I do my assessments, I look very carefully for certain key signs that tell me whether or not some kind of neurosis is at work, or whether some character disturbance is likely at work. And when it comes to character disturbance, usually there are different operating principles at work. And as it came to pass in this particular case, as I did the evaluation, it turned out that this gentleman in this relationship, from a very early age, had been somewhat of a sensation seeker, a daredevil, a risk taker, and never had much in the way of meaningful relationships with anyone. He tended to seek excitement and to seek short-lived, highly stimulating, but not deep relationships, and not out of a fear that he would be either oppressed or smothered or devoured or overbeared upon, but rather he didn't have much interest in anything but the superficial. As a matter of fact, he had plenty of opportunities to deal with folks of more substance, but preferred casual encounters because they were quick, easy. He got his gratification, and then he moved on. And that's what he liked. And there was no fear primarily operating in him, but rather a desire, a real fondness for highly charged, stimulating relationships, but without depth. And why not depth? Because depth involves something that he really detested, and that was obligation. Looking back at his life, we saw that he had a marked distaste for accepting obligation. He did not like to feel obliged to anyone. And whereas he tended to see his mom as overbearing because she actually tried to urge him to be responsible as he was growing up, and she recognized early on his distaste for accepting obligation and his irresponsible behavior pattern. And she did her best to try and show him the way, basically, and to explain to him the folly of a life that is lived solely on the pleasure principle and doesn't involve any taking of responsibility. And he only regarded that as getting in the way. So, yes, from his point of view, perhaps, and actually I think in working with him, he knew better. He knew that his mother was not truly overbearing. She just tried her best to help him out. And he certainly didn't mistrust her because he knew without question the purity of her motives. He knew without question that every attempt she made to get him to see reason was based in her deep love for him and her wanting the best for him. So it wasn't that he found her overbearing and smothering and mistrusted her and therefore mistrusted all women and became suspicious of them and therefore phobic of any kind of intimate relationship with them. That wasn't it at all. He was just wired different in character, and it was not just causing problems in his relationship with his wife. It was causing problems everywhere. He didn't accept obligations at work. He didn't accept obligations with his kids. Matter of fact, the only reason he got married at all, the only reason he really got married is because he'd had a pretty checkered history already of meeting his obligations academically and at work, and was not really doing all that well in life. And he met a woman who was very responsible, who had graduated from college with an advanced degree and near the top of her class and had a great career. And she afforded them a pretty nice lifestyle. So what he was really looking for there was another mom to work too hard to take care of him, while he simply was irresponsible and engaged in his usual thrill-seeking and responsibility avoidance. Now, had his behavior been framed that way, do you think there's any way that this woman would have been the suffering servant as long as she was in this relationship, sticking it out, letting him basically walk all over her and betray her time and time and time again? No, she only did this because somebody had her believing that the root of the problem was his fear, and that his fear was founded in the fact that he believed women, including her, would eventually betray him, were not trustworthy, would eventually try to dominate him, would try to overbear, would smother him, would cause him to lose any sense of identity, and therefore she did her best to prove her unconditional love and acceptance and her safety. And all she got for it was further exploitation and abuse. Now, if that kind of a story doesn't tell you how important it is to get the frame right, I don't know. I can't think of, well, I can think of hundreds of examples, but I can't think of a better example. And I know this for a fact from comments that people make when they email me and give me comments about my books. By the way, you can email me anytime at George K. Simon, that's all one word, George K. Simon at sbcglobal.net. Love to take your emails. But people email me all the time, and the thing that they tell me about either in sheep's clothing or character disturbance, especially character disturbance, is that just seeing things a different way, especially a way that they always felt in their gut was probably true, but no professional would validate, that just that mere fact alone changed everything for them and turned their entire lives around. Well, I have to tell you, folks, there's nothing that makes me feel better than that. All my life's work, every effort I've ever made to get the word out there to folks, it's worth every bit of it just to hear that one time from somebody. And I've heard it hundreds, thousands of times now. But it is so validating, and it is so comforting, and it's so reinforcing. It's what inspires me and ratifies me in my work. But to hear someone say that they always thought that there was something wrong with that person in their life, a lot differently than they'd been led to believe. In their gut, they felt there was something else, but they couldn't get anybody else, especially another mental health professional, to validate how they were feeling. And sometimes the professional gave them an entirely different take on things, a take on things that didn't square at all with the way they were seeing things. And so that made them feel wrong, a little bit crazy, and also invited them to deal with the situation a lot differently than they would have otherwise. And so it means a lot that in just reading the descriptions and the framework that I outline in those two books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, that just seeing that, seeing reality, their reality, with the disturbed character in their lives from a new, refreshing, and validating perspective, that just that alone changed everything, changed their lives, empowered them, made them feel like there was going to be some hope, helped them understand. That alone is worth everything. So this series that I introduced this past Friday is going to be one heck of a series. We're going to tackle some of the major misconceptions that exist still out there. If, as was in vogue 3 or 4 years ago, if we can still, in this day and age, refer to obsessive compulsive people as being quote unquote anal, when there's just absolutely no validity to that notion, and it's truly an absurd, archaic notion. If we can still do that, then unfortunately we can still have an awful lot of other misconceptualizations about why people do things. And we're going to be tackling, I'll just give you some of the topics that we're going to be tackling in this series of articles. We're going to be tackling some terms like passive aggression, anger management, defense mechanisms, shame, guilt, remorse, contrition, personality, character disorders, addiction, abuse, acting out, denial, neurosis, psychopathy, sociopathy, PTSD or post-traumatic stress, codependence. Oh, that's a big one. We'll be spending a good deal of time on codependence, because talk about an overused, incorrectly used term. Oh my gosh. Who isn't codependent? Who hasn't been codependent these days? And for many years, that term has been bandied about. And every time I hear folks use the term, I ask them what they think it means. And you'd be surprised the answers that I get. We'll be talking about that. I'll have a post, probably a whole post on the Manipulative-People blog on just that concept. So the list I've given you, by the way, is not exhaustive. We're going to be covering a lot of topics. Plus, I've asked folks, and I'm asking you folks in the listening audience too, I've asked folks to please write your comments as either comments to the posts or contact me via the back channel on my blog. On the Contact Dr. Simon tab, there is a feature there where you can write a note to me and send it via the back channel. It comes to my email box at georgeKsimon@sbcglobal.net, and I will answer you as soon as I can. I do need to apologize to folks. If any of you who are listening have written me lately, I'm still about a week behind, maybe a week and a half behind answering emails. I apologize for that. I get really just tons of emails every week, and it's really hard to keep up. I apologize about this. I'm not making excuses here, really. I'm just saying that I get to as many as I can in a day. It's tough to do all the rest that I do and treat the questions that I get fairly and respond fairly. I answer all these inquiries myself. So it takes some time to sift through them, and there are times when I literally get deluged with emails, as I have been in the past few months. It really, since June, it's been kind of an avalanche of emails. Sometimes it takes me a while to sift through them, and so it'll be a while yet. But I'll get to you. I promise. I will answer your email. But you can send me via email. You can call into the program. You can make a comment on the blog or submit an example as a comment or via the back channel on the blog. And we will discuss it, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions you have about things that have confused you with regard to psychological principles, terms, and concepts. So feel free to write or contact me. I'd love to hear from you, and if you want to give me a call tonight, I'd be glad to take your call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Be glad to take your call. I know we just changed over from daylight savings time early this morning, so perhaps some of you have not quite adjusted to the time change, but we still have a little over 15 minutes to the program, so we have plenty of time to discuss any issues that you have. I also had something else, though, I wanted to talk about and also refer you to. I wrote a summary article on the Oscar Pistorius case. It was a concluding article on a series of articles that I called A Sportsman's Instinct. These articles appeared on the counselingresource.com blog. That's www.counseling with two L's resource.com blog. The blog's name, if you're Googling for it, is called Philosophy, Psychology, and Real Life. Or perhaps it says Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life. I'm not sure. But if you Google that, you will get to the blog. And I post a weekly article there. You'll also find, from years past, a series of mine called Ask the Psychologist, in which people submitted questions of a psychological nature, and I answered them. And you'll find them in the archives there, about 3 years worth of questions and answers. But you'll also find my weekly articles, and I had a series of articles when the case first broke about Pistorius and the shooting of his then-girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp, and his defense that he believed that he was shooting at an intruder through the bathroom door and didn't realize that he had killed his girlfriend. I wrote a series of articles. I titled it A Sportsman's Instinct because Pistorius' father said that knowing his son and knowing his son's temperament since an early age and how he was hardwired as a sportsman, that he knew sportsmen to have a particular instinct, and that is they kind of do first, act on impulse, and think later. According to Pistorius' father, that's just the way certain sportsmen are. They're so aggressive in style. They are kind of hot off the trigger, short-triggered, and easily riled, and ready to kind of do combat. This makes them good sportsmen, but it also kind of propels them into going off half-cocked sometimes and regretting the consequences later. And he early on thought that is what happened in the Steenkamp tragedy. So that's why I titled the series of articles I wrote, A Sportsman's Instinct. And I made the point, anybody that reads my books knows this, that in my book, Character Disturbance, I go to great length to explain that there's a group of individuals whom I call the aggressive personalities. These are folks who are not defined by their physical violence, per se, because that is not a necessary attribute, but they are defined by an excessive aggressive predisposition that they have. They go beyond being assertive in that they kind of have a take no prisoners, no holds barred approach to life. Everything in life is a fight. Everything is a battle that they must win, that they must come out on top of, and therefore they tackle life hard. And they set their goals with determination and with force, and they forcefully strive to achieve them and to win and to have power and dominance. And they pursue their quests with such passion and with such lack of reservation that it sometimes causes trouble. And I mentioned that there is a type of aggressive personality that I call the channeled aggressive personality that generally keeps their aggression confined to socially acceptable outlets, such as competitive sports, such as the military, law enforcement, things where you can use force and even rough it up sometimes in what most folks consider a socially acceptable way. Prize fighting, another thing. If you're a drill sergeant, you kind of got it made. One of these personalities might gravitate toward that kind of thing. But here's the other thing about these kinds of personalities that I call channeled aggressive personalities, and that is they act first and they think later. They're literally like a walking impulse. And after they do these aggressive things sometimes that sometimes result in disaster, they can feel bad. They can feel really bad. But that doesn't mean that they have the kind of contrition and the kind of remorse that would cause them to second guess their approach to life. And therefore, they don't change. They feel bad for a moment, but then they go on their merry way. And they do these same kinds of things again. And in the Pistorius case, we hear that this is a guy, who even fired off a firearm in a restaurant. He had this fascination with guns. And then, realizing what he'd done and realizing how badly it would reflect on him, wanted somebody else to take the fall for it. Wanted one of his friends who was with him. Now, somebody could have gotten really hurt. It really was a miracle, actually, that somebody didn't get hurt, because this gun went off under the table and somebody easily could have gotten shot in the foot. And fortunately, the bullet missed. But knowing that he had, once again, acted first and thought later, and realizing that there could be adverse consequences to him, his reputation, and to his career, he asked one of his buddies to take the fall for him. And like a fool, the buddy did. Of course, the buddy is being true blue, but nonetheless, this is enabling. For those of you who understand that concept of enabling, this is just the kind of enabling behavior that keeps one of these characters doing these same kinds of things over and over and over again. So whether or not Pistorius truly did act without thinking that perhaps this was an intruder and firing first and asking questions later, or he was ticked off with his girlfriend about something and in a moment's fit of rage started firing and then thought to himself, oh my God, what have I done afterward? We'll never know. We'll never know for sure. Myself, I'm inclined to believe the latter as opposed to the former, because I just didn't see anything in the evidence that really strongly supported that contention. But there was nothing solid to disprove it either. But regardless of that, regardless of how it went down, nobody will ever know for sure. This is what goes wrong with these kinds of personalities. They act first, think later, and they feel badly about it. They feel badly about the consequence. In other words, I'm sure Pistorius feels bad that his then girlfriend, perhaps soon to be fiancée, is dead. And this fact seemed to influence the judge on sentencing, I think, way too much. Here's a man who, by all means now, by all appearances, appears to have suffered enough. But these appearances can be deceiving. I know so many abusive, aggressive personalities who feel bad each and every time they fly off the handle. But that doesn't stop them from flying off the handle. We always think they're going to learn a lesson, but they don't learn a lesson because they don't go to the core of the dilemma, which has to do with their character. They don't do the soul searching necessary to say, what is it about me that makes me want to do these things? And don't I have an obligation to myself and to the rest of society to do something about that? They don't do that. And for that reason, they are still ticking time bombs, even though they can display tremendous regret or remorse. And I think that in displaying the kind of sadness that he did, and the kinds of other things that the judge saw, I think that influenced the decision about how to sentence him. And I fear that justice was not served. So I wrote a summary article. You can check it out on the counselingresource.com blog, the counseling with 2 L's resource.com, or Google psychology, philosophy, and real life, and you'll be taken to that blog. You'll see the summary article. You'll see my references in that article to the entire series on a sportsman's instinct that took a hard look at this case and also took a look at a more in-depth look at these personalities that I call the channeled aggressive personalities, puts them in context with the other aggressive personalities that I describe in my book, Character Disturbance, and also in my book, In Sheep's Clothing, and explains just what it is about these folks that makes them tip, what makes them such problems in their relationships, how to deal with them more effectively, what to look out for, what to watch out for if you get hooked up with one of these folks, how to protect yourself, how to empower yourself, how to see the warning signs that you might need to get out quick. All these things are in the articles, and also I have a series of articles on the aggressive personalities, both on the counselingresource.com blog and on my own blog at manipulative-people.com. Still, there's no substitute for the books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and for those of you of the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome. These books give my perspective, my take on things, explain concepts in terms that any layperson can understand. I promise you it will change not only your perspective, but it will perhaps empower you in a way that you haven't been empowered before, helping you to see things in a new and different way, help you to understand that problem character in your life, understand what really makes them tick, how they manage to get the better of you, how they manage to exploit and abuse you, and how they take advantage of you without you knowing it sometimes. So until we meet again next week, I invite you to visit my blogs and my website at drgeorgesimon.com, and I'll ask you to please tune in again next week for another edition of Character Matters, our special edition for Veterans Day next Sunday.